This is Growth Guide, a podcast exploring the depths of curiosity, questioning everything in the name of growth. I'm your host, Brian D'Alessandro. Chef Laura Mcintosh is the host of PBS's Bringing It Home, a cooking show that combines recipes from innovative chefs with farm-fresh food. Mcintosh travels the country, bringing viewers to the farms that produce the most abundant crops, and then brings them together with culinary wizards who turn their bounty into fresh and healthy gourmet meals for the whole family. Mcintosh refers to the show as Behind the Food, showing viewers what goes on behind the scenes to make fresh ingredients available to be used by home cooks as well as professional chefs. Laura comes from a generational family of farming and restaurateurs. We discuss the lost art of farming and the intersection of technology and intuition. This episode is for anyone looking to grow a deeper connection to their food, the growers, and the planet. Laura, thank you so much for joining today. Really excited for our conversation.
Brian, I am so happy to be here. I want to first thank you so much for the invitation to come here and to be a part of this conversation.
Absolutely. You're, one of those people, we just instantly connected. Conversation just flowed and went everywhere. So I'm really hoping to honor that today and really let the conversation guide us. But I guess a good place to start is your work around connecting people to their food and the growers. I'm really curious of what your relationship was to food and to farming and the earth growing up.
So I always find this question so fun to answer because I find myself here because it's what I was born into. It's where I believe I came to be in this position on this space. And my family's been farming in California for over 150 years. So I grew up, like if someone grew up in the inner city or they grew up in, say, downtown San Francisco, and that was their childhood till adulthood, that's what they knew. I grew up living around family, around open spaces, around people that worked together, maybe sometimes not because they absolutely wanted to, but because they had to, because this was life, right? And so there were a variety of dynamics that you are born into, that you learn. And so my family that grew up in Northern California, been farming for over 150 years, and I sat right in the middle of it. And I watched my father's side of the family farm and my mother's side of the family, have a restaurant and the only bar in this teeny little agricultural town. So I feel like naturally food brought everything and all together. And what I really find fun is when I sit back and I think about food bringing people together. As a child, I watched that dynamic. So more so just in the doing of either farming or serving people food, I was able to sit back and watch people in that space, whether, how they liked or talked about or did the farming, how they cooked or how they served or how they communicated with the food that they presented. It was more than just the item, it was the interaction that those items and that stuff, if you will, enabled. So I think that's why naturally I've been bringing it home and wanting to share that aspect of life and food with people.
And as you observed this through your younger years and up till now, what did you see? What did you feel in these interactions?
It was interesting. There's so many different layers to it. So, there's when you talk about, let's talk about farming first, because food is so easy for me because it just is. And farming has so many different layers. And a lot of people think of farmers as, hicks, if I can say hicks, right? Or these pitchfork and shovel people. And they came from that. They were not the people that went out and mined the gold. They were people that sold the shovels for those that went out to mine for the gold. And so they really had to learn how to develop farming in a period where there wasn't a lot of technology, in a time where there wasn't a lot of space in the agriculture. And so the dynamic of watching them do it was across the board. There were times where things were good and there was a beautiful bounty that was harvested, and there were bad times and there was a rain that ruined your crop and there was nothing. And so they're watching the dynamic of how these people not necessarily dealt with whether you had produce to sell or no produce to sell, the dynamic of the abundance of that or the lack of that, how that affected life. And that's what I thought was really cool, because farmers are generating food for people, and there's a nurturing about them. And yeah, there's these big farmers out there, and a lot of these farming men in the old, these like big guys, right? And they had to be, because they had to lift bales of hay. They didn't have huge tractor. I mean, there was a lot of laborious work and physical work out there. And so there were these big guys, and it was hard on them, and they were gruff, and but at the same time, every morning they were the first one up. They were the first one to smell the fresh air or the dew, or be able to feel the wind on their shoulder and kind of know which direction it's coming from and what it's going to do to their crops. So the dynamic of a farmer is so enormous, even in today's technology. Those fundamental applications of knowing, you can look outside and go, oh boy, there's a squall coming, and it's going to do this, and it's going to, in about 3:00, it's going to do that. It's just the coolest thing it's almost in a way like a surfer, right? They can look at the ocean and they'll know which way the wave's coming in, and they'll know where the undertow is. They'll know where the current's coming from. You just have to be in tune with nature, the land, and the atmosphere, everything really.
Yeah, that intelligence and that connection is so powerful. And I love the picture you paint of that contrast between that large physical strength and toughness and resiliency that they have to carry, but on the other hand, these much more feminine qualities of being in tune, intuitive, and connected, and also gentle, which is such a beautiful balance. And I do think that is something we're searching for and yearning for in our culture that's kind of detached from it. But you also, bring up this connotation of a lot of our public perception of farmers as, like you said, hicks. And I would even go as far to say a lot of times I think farmers are looked at as just not being as bright as people who studied in academia. And in my experience, that is so far from the truth. The amount of knowledge and wisdom and experiential knowledge and wisdom that they hold is profound. They're also gatekeepers to this historical lineage of learning that gets passed down generationally, a lot of what we've lost touch with. But I think it's really important to acknowledge and honor, because it's a level of intelligence and wisdom that doesn't look like what we might necessarily test for in our school systems. But I think there's a whole depth of value to this type of knowledge and wisdom that we don't see in a lot of other areas.
Right. And you brought up, which I think is so interesting, because generational farming is really the way things are farmed today. The average farmer is 65 years old. It's not a young profession, and yet there are a lot of kids that are born into it, move away from it, and come back to it, which is why I think you see this fluctuation in age in this area. And I think what's interesting about the generational farming aspect is that connectivity that is innately learned by just watching your grandfather or your father. Words may not be spoken, but visuals are somehow absorbed and then just known, right? You understand what they did by watching them 100 times. You may not know why exactly, but you just know. And then if you have that touch and that connection, I'm looking outside because it's outside, right? The connection with just the external, intrinsically if doing that is right. And I think that, yes, you can learn that technically, but I also think there's such a gift in the generational farming aspect of farming, in that you can learn that. And I think there's also in that a deeper connection to the roots of things. I mean, think about the American Indians when they were first here. The elder probably did not necessarily teach the youngers, they just did, and the youngers just watched. And you just pick up those ceremonial adaptations by just intuitively watching and knowing. And I think that's what is going to heal our agricultural and our farming landscape today, is just really continuing to encourage and be supportive of, yes, the technology growth, and yes, the regenerative growth and the organic growth, but it being okay that people take that time to really be ceremonial around agriculture, because agriculture and nature appreciates it. It's a give and a take thing. And so I think all of those layers are so important. And I hope I kind of went off on a tangent, and I'm sorry to do that, but I just think there's so many dynamics of agriculture that people don't understand. That's really important and makes it really special, right? It makes it more than just this clunky, set in their ways. The other thing that I've noticed, so my family, has done farming for years, but with the show, I've gone out and talked to farmers across the country, right? And they have this, like, I'm going to say it's like a gene, right? That they are all not the same, because no one is the same, but they all have this thing about them that is similar with respect to the land and growing and nurturing. But I think what's really funny is I think that kind of hard shell that they portray, I think it's because they are such, I almost want to say, like musicians of the land. They are so in tune. They play a certain chord that makes a certain type of music, i.e. the commodity that comes out of. And so I think they have to have that hard shell, because deep down they're so soft. They're so in tune, and they love being outside and being in nature. And I think now more than ever, that's completely acceptable, but I think we've grown into that too. And so there's still a lot of those with that hard shell of, I'm a farmer and this is the way we do it. It's like, open up that door, because yes, you are a farmer and you're good at it, but inside there, I know, is someone that is just a nurturer and is a cultivator of beautiful things. And I know that 9 out of 10 farmers respect nature because they have to. So you can't be a non-sensitive person and respect nature the way farmers do. So that's my tangent on farmers.
I love that take. And they are, serving a very clear source, and that is nature. And so when they're speaking to someone who's outside of that, there is a layer often of protecting Mother Nature, because that's who they serve. And you speak about these qualities in which they serve, such as that gentleness, that intuition, there's a sensing and a feeling, and there's that subtle relationship. And when we get into these other conversations that are intellectual or physical, they can easily overcrowd or turn the volume up over the subtle. And so I see that there's almost a guardianship of farmers. It's really interesting. I've been fortunate working for some years in the hemp industry, was able to meet a bunch of different farmers across the country. But just this past week, in a totally unrelated space, I met this farmer who I'll just call Bill, out of Idaho, and 6'3", huge strapping German descendant, who's just everything you stereotypically think of as a farmer. And if I just saw him in his work clothes walking down the street, I'd have my stories. But I was able to connect with him and hear his approach. And man, what, like, the gentle giant is what really comes to me. He was so in tune, but also in dialogue. I think that's part of it, is that most farmers speak a different language. It's not the language of words. It is one of feeling and relationship. And he shared with me something as extreme sounding as he would always be following the rules for when to plant his seeds, and just following what everyone was doing, what the standards were for the window. And he started communing. He would sing to his seeds and to his crops. And he started asking his seeds, like, all right, is it time? And he'd look over, and he said he experiences it as the bag starts shaking and it starts telling him, not yet, wait another week. And he explained how, once this window of planting, this was for corn, once that closes, if he misses it, he misses the crop for the season. And so he learned that it was fear driving him to plant it earlier, even though he sensed it should be later. And then when the actual corn seed confirmed to him, it's not time yet, wait, he started listening. And his crop has consistently produced far better because of it. And I thought this was just such an incredible relationship that this guy held, and especially because of what he looked like, exactly what you described, the big strapping Paul Bunyan type guy.
Yeah. And the thing that's interesting about what you say too is when I hear you, the thing that resonates with me too is he's listening to the seeds, but the seeds aren't talking back to him in words. So how is he hearing? And that's, to me, what I think is so very cool. It's that farmers have to hear differently than we hear. Like, we get an email, we know what we need to answer and we know what we need to do. They talk to a seed and they have to really feel and be in tune with those energies that are coming off that seed. And there are energies coming off that seed, and they need to be able to read them. And so, I mean, sometimes people, I don't want to go off too far in the right or left, but I mean, sometimes people would say farmers are, are witches or warlocks or whatever they may be, because there is that nonverbal communication that happens between a seed, in your example, and a farmer. It's cool.
Really cool. So how do you think it is that we have come to a place where we at large undervalue our farmers and our food supply, for that matter?
Oh, wow, that's a really, really good question, Brian. And I think there are so many different answers to that. And I think depending on where you are, in your life, where you are in the world, those dynamics are different everywhere. But I do think, just in being in this space since I was small, and I moved away from it. I mean, I'm up in Northern California and I did the LA thing, and I was going to get out of here. And I wanted to raise my kids back where there were different values that I believed in. But I think that's the key to it, though. I think that people that don't know what those values are think that, in class, right, you would take a potato and you'd put the things in it that would hold it in a cup with water, and you'd see it sprout. Okay. Doesn't take any education, doesn't take much. You can grow a potato, it's easy. So I think there's that thought in people's mind that, I grew a potato in third grade. How hard can it be? Right. So I think there's this diminishment of all that goes into the factors that go into growing large amounts of food for our collective. And there are so many more people today than there were back when, and we're going to continue to grow. And so I think people don't understand. I think as a whole, people think it's cool, but they don't understand what they do day in and day out. They just really don't. They don't understand that, like you said, if you plant the corn too late, forget it. Don't even bother. Put alfalfa in there, because you're not going to get corn. It's not going to happen for you. Well, you have a family to provide for. You have other people that you've committed corn to, that you have to provide that corn to. And so if that doesn't happen, there's a whole, you fall down the ladder real fast. And you have to figure out how to do that. Or maybe you planted the corn at the right time, but a rain came in or a flood came in and washed that away. So how do you adjust to that? So I don't think people understand really the dynamics and the values that go into providing food for people. And I think that's what people have forgotten. They can go to the grocery store and it's there. Food for us in this day and age
Yeah.
is so accessible. Whether you can walk into the grocery store and buy cherries year round, they don't grow year round, or you can go through the drive-through and get a chicken McNugget. It's not chicken, So, I mean, I think people
Mm-hmm.
just, the convenience has been so steadfast that
Yeah.
absence makes the heart grow fonder. And I think
Mm.
without that, people take it for granted. And I don't think they mean to. I don't think they go out to go, oh, whatever. People are not like that. Most people want
Mm-mm.
to help,
Mm-mm.
and they were born into love, right? So we all come from that space. And I think if there's this gentleness and there's this really beautiful approach of being able to explain to people that while you may see a farmer driving around in his truck, he's not just out for a joyride, guys. There's a lot that goes into that.
Oh, I mean, farmers are the hardest working folks I've ever come across. And, we live in a rural area in New York State. Sometimes before the sun is up and after the sun is down, they're going at it every day.
Yes.
And it's beyond. I could relate. And I love that you acknowledge that there's not an intention usually of people to not have that relationship. But, I grew up in a household where we were very disconnected from our food, and that's what I really boil it down to, is just being disconnected. And I do believe that it happens incrementally. And I've been using this analogy a lot, but the whole test with the frog being boiled in water, where the water is incrementally increased and the frog will stay in until it's boiled because it doesn't realize the extreme change over time. And that's what happens for us in a lot of ways. With food, we're either born into something or we start getting exposed to something, and over time our relationship shifts. And the beauty of that is we have the ability to shift it so that we're back into connection with our food. I mean, I grew up, the food was largely already prepared, or if it was, chicken breast, they were always the exact same size, shape, color. It was never having the whole chicken, so that you didn't even relate it to the actual animal that, it was a part of. And cheese came in a big orange Velveeta block, right? Or American cheese
Yeah.
slices. And so even though some of the names refer to what they are, they start to be so disconnected from what that true source is, that we lose that relationship. And when we lose that relationship, we lose respect for the process of what brought it here and who made that possible. It's a long thing. And then, as you pointed out, convenience. We're in this day and age of convenience. And I think that's the greatest cost, is that disconnection from what it really takes to get something there. And, it also brings up the point of, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And talk about seasonality. And I'd love for you to go more into seasonality. I think most people are familiar with it at this point, but let's cover that as a topic, because it's a really important one.
Right. And I just want to rewind for a second and just jump on the bandwagon that we've been talking about with regards to convenience and people kind of just being out of tune with where their food comes from. The real question is, how do we get people that are disconnected engaged enough to want to know where their food comes from? Because the way it's presented today, well, it's really not presented today in most places. And so the introduction of it, even in a very small scale, and I give the potato analogy, and it's silly, but it's true, or planting a seed. But that's it. That's all the time and effort that is given. And I think then it becomes perceived as something that's boring or not important.
Yeah, can I add something on that?
Yeah.
Because I feel like, for me, what happens is, when we experience it in the classroom, we stick toothpicks in the potato and a glass of water and we watch it. We're doing an experiment, but from an intellectual place. And once you're intellectualizing it, you're losing the opportunity to connect with that deeper relationship of what's going on there. The one that you described that the farmers have with the earth and with their crops. And that's, I think, a difference, right? We now, on the other hand, we see great success when schools are incorporating gardens into the classroom, or, even prisons that have rooftop gardens. I mean, it has profound impact.
Yes.
So I think how it's done really matters.
You're right in that, and expanding upon that, it really matters because it matters anyway. A farmer can't grow a crop sitting in a classroom. They have to experience it. They have to touch it. They have to see it. So you can't expect a child, or anyone for that matter, to experience it without having the tactile, without seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, understanding. So I think that interaction is what's missing. And what I try to do with bringing it home is relate it. Obviously, I relate it to cooking and recipes, because everyone eats and wants to learn how to cook more, especially when we've all had to be at home more than ever. So that's always a way to catch people and go, oh, kind of get it. It's exciting. But there's other ways to do it too. Like Jason Mraz, for example, he grows avocados and he grows them in Southern California. He understands the orchestra in music as the same example as an orchestra to grow produce. There's that symbiotic relationship that just moves, and it's really cool to get in that space. And I think most classrooms, most educational facilities don't, it's like textbook, test. What do you know now? What do you know now? Instead of like, and I know this is very organic and very simplistic, but I think there is some time and space, being able to get out there and let your kids have yard play, right, is so important. So is learning where your food comes from. So is learning how music comes together. Those are the heartstrings of our lives that really matter. And then build the foundation for their families and their families and their families. And yes, 2 + 2 = 4 in mathematics is important because it's in music, it's in farming, it's in all those things.
Yeah.
But there's gotta be, go play on the monkey bars, go dig a little piece of dirt out and plant some strawberries. We just need to really get back to that.
Yeah, well said. It's a whole other language, the same way that mathematics is another language, right? And we test for that. But this language is just as important, and it's largely forgotten in our current day and age. So I agree. And one of the important things to acknowledge with language, you're not going to hear it once. You might pick up a couple of words and you might hold on to them. But if you truly want to build a vocabulary, you need consistency. And that's the other thing that, the potato growing experiment doesn't offer. Right. It's having that consistency and in relationship to all of these other elements that we can't necessarily control, so that we learn how. And that's like with language, then you're in conversation.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's, we want to get to that point. It's not fun to just learn the language and not share it. So,
and you even said it, you said it's an experiment that you do in class. So now already your mind has compartmentalized it as an experiment, not something that we do so that we can all eat. It's just it's a weird little different way of looking at it. And we don't look at it that way until a carton of milk is $5. And then we're like, wait a minute, what the heck? So, until that convenience starts to become an inconvenience, we don't realize how important it is. And so somehow, if we can just kind of, I don't know, fill in that gap somehow. And there are so many beautiful creative minds out there that know how to do this, that I really wish that, we could get some people to do that. I mean, look at people that built all of this beautiful electronics that are going on today and the things that we can do. We can do that in farming. And you talk about seasonality, technology and agriculture go hand in hand. And most things and most technology became what it is today because of agriculture. So all of the weather apps and how we can understand weather, it came from farming. You can look it up. I mean, it's when people go, really? Yeah. Farmers had the weather app, if you will, before there was ever a weather app, and then somebody devised it for more of a commercial use, but agriculture's always had it. The hulls of a walnut are the hottest burning substance on the planet insofar as agriculture. And so they use that as fuel to go to space. NASA uses it as fuel. They burn it because it burns so hot. That's agriculture. And so you asked me about seasonality and I went off on a tangent, but seasonality is so important. And I personally think, and I've talked to a lot of physicians and a lot of people who've done studies on this. And while you can't, maybe you could write a paper on it. I'm not smart enough to, but I believe the body knows and is set up to know when to eat oranges, know when a peach or a cherry or a plum is in season. Your body, if done correctly, starts to crave those things. In the hottest part of the summer, watermelon sounds so great. Why? Because that's when it's in season, and 86 to 96% of a watermelon is water, right? It's rehydration. And so your body intuitively knows, oh my God, I've got to get some watermelon. I need water. In the wintertime, when cold and flu season is at its peak, the body knows it needs vitamin C, and we crave citrus. So the body tells us when we need what we need and what to eat, if we only are in tune and listen. And what's the coolest thing ever, if you think about it, if you're in tune with your body and your body knows what it needs and craves, you will almost always find that that's what's in season. I mean, again, this goes back to a little bit of like, looking at the stars to guide the boat, but it's real.
Well, it's very real. And, again, it's when humans remove themselves from the larger biological system and see themselves as separate. They're like, oh, that's BS. Like, how could that be? We're all on the same cycles in its most natural form. And so when we come through these seasons, we're going through that together. And so the things that are offered or presented to us, it's not selfless. It's because they're getting a benefit from that as well. And there's a reciprocal, symbiotic relationship when we embrace it and don't deny it. But I mean, I experienced this when I moved out of the city after being in Manhattan for 20 years and moved upstate. This coming back into flow and relationship with the seasons. And it goes from just the, sun and moon when things are rising and setting, and then you start seeing what is growing and you're like, what is that plant? Oh, goldenrod. Let me look into that. What is that good for? Oh, and it's right around fall time when like a lot of respiratory stuff is coming about, and you could make incredible teas that's great for, the respiratory health. And, just these natural, we call remedies. I mean, they're really, synchronicities of the seasons that, are there because that's what's happening in our biosphere. It's just a matter of being in harmony with it rather than trying to force it into something else.
And what's really cool about that, because you got it, I mean, that's right. That's just, and a lot of people think it's hairy-fairy, and you can think it's hairy-fairy and that's fine. But like you said,
yeah, it could be that if you want it to be that. And if you don't want it to be that and you're labeling that as bad, maybe ask yourself why. What's making you go there versus just curiosity and saying, is there something I could learn from that? Is there something of value?
Right. And I always say, why can't you blend the two? You may not want to believe it because you think it's this hairy-fairy thing, but it's funny that, like you're saying, at a certain time of year, garlic is at its peak, and it's just before colds come into season, right at the end of summer. And so you could, as maybe a mainstream shopper, say, oh yeah, okay, well, garlic's ready. Great that it's ready just in time for cold and season. That's what the folklore that I know. I love cooking garlic in my recipes. Why can't you have both? You can have both, right? You can buy into the real flow of what it's all about and go, oh my God, that's really cool. I get it. And I love using it. and I'm going to go get it, right? It doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think that's the biggest, that almost goes back to one of your first questions. Why is there this separation? And why do people think farming is kind of this hokey pokey? I think because they have to compartmentalize it and think it's either hairy-fairy and it's all organic, or it's all sustainable, or it's all this, or it's all that, or it's not. And here's the thing, you're not going to put agriculture in a box. You can't. So you can have the best of both worlds. You can say, okay, there's folklore behind this and it's kind of cool. I could go down that rabbit hole and really investigate, and it could make even more and more sense. Don't really want to. That's not where I'm at. But I think it's kind of cool that there's that folklore and there's meaning behind it. To gravitate to knowing there's that, but then using it anyway and being mainstream about it, there's something that kind of blends the two that makes it really fun. It makes it fun. And that's what we need to start doing, in my humble opinion.
I think fun is one of the best teachers, right?
Yes.
When we can have fun with whatever we're doing, we enjoy doing it, we absorb it a lot better, and we retain it a lot better because there's a positive experience associated to it. So I'm completely with you there. And that's where I think in general, anytime we get too constricted around our relationship to even healthy food, or, take the organic example. There's a lot of people that get so fixated on, it has to be organic, I have to see that symbol, and like that's the only thing I'll eat. And it starts to taint like the experience, whether it be just for them or with their situation. And first of all, organic's good. It's a good way to get a general idea of how something was grown, but there's a lot more behind that. And so just being curious and inquisitive, like upstate near us, there's farmers that aren't certified organic. And when you start asking them why, but not with a judgment, but with a curiosity, you start learning the requirements of them, the cost for them. If they're not at the right scale, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Or philosophically, they might not agree with certain aspects of it, which you might actually agree more with as well. So there's a lot going on there, and a lot of farmers that are growing with an intentional and almost organic practice might actually align with your beliefs in health and wellness even more than what the standard of USDA organic entails. So there's so much more when we actually start digging deeper.
No, you hit on that organic button. It's that easy button that makes me want to go, because I see exactly what you're saying is 100% right. There is conventional farming, there's organic farming, there's regenerative farming. And a lot of people don't understand the nuances of each. And each one of those and others have their place. And like most things, and I'm not anti-government at all. I love our government. But when the government does get involved and they start imposing rules and regulations that may or may not go against how the commodities should be raised in the first place, one has to start wondering why. And like you said, there may be nuances in organic that are imposed so that they can be labeled organic, that may not agree with how you want to eat your food, right? So people have this fundamental belief that organics have no sprays, or they aren't, they don't have any sprays or pesticides. They do, right? And it's now you have to go down this rabbit hole of, okay, well, what kind of pesticides, what in the plant is it taking away from or giving to? Then what is that doing to my body? And that is the same for regenerative, organics, non-organics, conventional farming. So this is why this conversation with you and I today is so important, because once you know that farmer, once you go and talk to that corn farmer and you understand what he's doing and why. A lot of people think, oh, they don't want to do organics because it costs too much. You said cost in your in your language, and I picked up on it, and I went, most farmers, yes, are very sensitive to the cost of growing their yields, because those costs are passed on to their consumers, right? And they're very receptive to that. And agriculture is a business. They also want to make money so they can feed their family. We can't be ignorant to that either. But they're not opposed if something is better. If there's a better way to do something and it costs a little bit more, but it will help everyone across the board, 9 out of 10 farmers will do it regardless of the cost, because it's better for you, for them, for the land, for the growth of the crop. So the thing with organics is, know what that is. If it's important to you, go down that space where you really, really look at both sides of that coin, right? Because there are two sides of everything. And I do organics and I do non-organics. I sometimes choose to do it and I sometimes don't choose to do it. The one little tip I can give your listeners is that strawberries are the most organic commodity there is, because all the seeds of the strawberry are on the outside of the strawberry. So the fruit really is on the outside of the seeds. And there's about 200 seeds on the outside of every average strawberry. That's the number. And those seeds keep pollution out, right? So the chemical makeup of what that seed does for that strawberry is it's a barrier so that you won't get any of the pollutants from the outside, which is why if any of your listeners have ever gone to Los Angeles or Orange County and driven to Disneyland and they see orange groves and then they see these huge sky-rise buildings, it's because strawberries can live where there is pollution, really and truly. So again, and that's an organic commodity, right? But it's right in the middle of smog so if you want to go down that rabbit hole, make sure you look at both sides and do what's good for you. Don't do what's good because people are telling you to do that. That's the other thing. I mean, people.
Yeah. Everyone has their own agendas, let's say, right? Their own reasons. And I think educating is absolutely the best. The other thing I'll say is that I know my food and health journey has been very incremental. It's not been an overnight thing for me. And so just learning things little by little makes a huge difference so that you don't get overwhelmed. And the other thing I'll say in my journey, one of the most impactful experiences I had was joining a local CSA. It was when I was living in Manhattan and I found a CSA that was being run out of the YMCA. All of a sudden we were getting a weekly share of produce and fruits and vegetables from a farm. We were learning about the farmers, their farming practices. If one week something that was supposed to be there wasn't, they'd explain to us why. And all of a sudden I started appreciating their situation so much more, and also appreciating the food, the yield, so much more.
My question for you is, what led you to do a CS program in the first place?
Good question. I think for me, I had become aware of quality of the food matters, right? So I need to now get educated around what that looks like. And this was well before organic, non-GMO, any of these labeling practices were in place. So it was kind of, even more of the Wild West. So I needed to get educated. I was watching a lot of documentaries. I was reading books. And, I think, Michael Pollan's Food Rules was a nice one for me because it was so simple and quippy, but started, giving me insights that I might have wanted to go deeper down the path on. And that led me to learning about CSAs. And then I went online and I searched and I was like, oh, I wonder if there are any around me. There were dozens in, New York City at the time, probably a lot more now. And it just sounded kind of cool. Like, oh, wow, I can get, a bushel of fruits and vegetables from a farm, and I'm also getting to invest in them, and, felt like I was supporting them locally.
Oh, that's exciting, because they're very good programs. And like anything, there are usually one in any part of the country that you can look into. And I'm a big proponent of CSAs just because, like you said, they do support the farmer, but like anything, make sure you're getting the right CSA program. I mean, it's not a one size fits all, but it's a wonderful way to go. And and getting out there. And if you sign up for the CSA program, going to the place that puts everything in the box for you, right? And meeting them and knowing them. So again, I guess everything that we've said and all of these little junctions that we've had and the conversations that we've had is getting to know the people behind your food, is really making that connectivity and sharing that relationship in food. It's our basic common denominator. We all have to eat. And so why not know the people that are providing what you're eating, even if it's just once? You can say, oh my God, I know them. They're the coolest people, right? I think that is important. And I think that will help people continue to want to learn and be motivated to grow your own. Tomato plants are the easiest plants in the world to grow. Grow one in your backyard. Just put them in a pot and grow tomatoes, because going out there and picking a tomato and putting it on a salad for dinner is so cool. And the taste is so different. And that's when you really start to appreciate on a larger scale what farmers do.
Yeah, those small little engagements that we create are really powerful. Creating a little herb garden, you could do this inside your apartment or on your patio if you have a house, and it's very low touch, but you really start to feel that connection to the food, and it's empowering as well. That feeling that, wow, I helped this to grow.
What's really cool about those things? I've had a couple of conversations with groups about the home kits, the herb kits, or you can do like mushrooms now, you can do garlic now, you can do the herbs on your. And a lot of people are like, oh my God, we got our kits. We were so excited. We started, we did it, and we got one. And I said, did you keep going? Did you do it year after year? And like, yeah, no, we didn't do it. And I laugh and I think, your choice, of course, no big deal. Because what if a farmer did that? What if a farmer went, well, I did it this year. I'm over it. Wow, where would our food go? So again, just another tool of saying that was really cool. It was rewarding. A lot of people continue to do them and build upon that, right? And then they go to have real, like, little backyard gardens or whatever. And so applause for sure. But there are those people that like get them as a Christmas gift or whatever and do it once, and it either does or doesn't work out. But then they're like, again, convenience. And it's like, And so I always think your choice. Of course you don't have to do that. But what if a farmer did? What if a farmer went, I'm over it now?
Right. Or even in reframing, like if we decide, I don't want to do it anymore. Okay. Hold that experience that you realize, there's something to this that takes a lot of work and effort and commitment. I'm hiring someone to do that for me every time I'm buying my food, right? So the idea of let's value who's doing it and select who's doing it and doing it with shared values.
God, that's so cool that you said it like that, Brian, because it almost does something too that I think is so empowering for people. I've just hired you to grow those strawberries for me or whatever it is, a tomato. I'm going to go and buy it from the best farmer out there. Now you've started to kind of seek out the best grower, the best cherry, peach, whatever it is, blueberry. And now it starts to become fun for you too, to think, oh yeah, but I got these from Bill and they're the best. And then you start to really appreciate what they do because you start to taste it. You share that taste with others, and you're, whether you realize you're doing it or not, you're advocating for them. And it's fantastic. So that was beautiful the way you said that.
Thanks. Yeah, it comes back to that whole concept of voting with your dollars, right? 100%. If you want something specific out there, the choices we make every day really do help shape that. And like you said, whether we realize we're doing it or we don't, we're making those decisions.
So, way we are.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Laura, is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up?
No, I think this has been such a great conversation, and it's so fun to have a conversation with agriculture and food, because again, it's our basic common denominator. And, when we can come together as a community and share it, or we can share it in our kitchen, or we can bring it over to someone's house. What can I bring for dinner? And you bring something, you're sharing a part of yourself through the food that you have either prepared yourself, raised yourself, or purchased from someone that you respect. And it's part of who you are, and it's a loving offering to give that to someone else and to give it to yourself. So I think there's no better thing to talk about and bring people together around than food and its origins.
Beautifully put, Laura. Thank you so much for joining with me today and talking about our food, farmers, and everything in between.
Brian, we could do this for, hours. So thank you for having me. I am honored that you had me on your show. I love it so much. And anytime, I hope to see you very, very soon in person.
Thanks for joining us this week on Growth Guide. A big thanks to our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by Morning Man. Live manly, own the morning. I learned about this from UFC champ Frank Shamrock. He was always having trouble getting started in the morning without like 7 or 8 cups of coffee. No exaggeration, I've seen this in person. So he created this product that's packed full of 45 superfoods and it has 95 milligrams of clean caffeine. So you get that charge from the greens and also get a hit from the caffeine without feeling all jacked up. I'm definitely caffeine sensitive and I like this product because it doesn't make me feel like I'm bouncing off the walls, but I feel sharp and energized to get shit done. Visit growthguide.love/morningman to learn more and use promo code GROWTH for 15% off. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Atmananda Yoga. You guys have got to check out their yoga alignment mat. I've been using this for a long time. As you know by now, I've studied and trained with them as a yoga teacher, and the mat is incredible to deepen your practice and to ensure a lifelong injury-free practice. Visit growthguide.love/alignment for more info or to buy. Be sure to use code GROWTH at checkout for 15% off. Make sure to visit our website, growthguide.love, where you can find freebies, exclusive content, and subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. If you found value in listening, I'd really appreciate a rating on iTunes. I can't tell you just how important this is. Or spread the love. Tell your friends, your fam, heck, tell your spirit animals. And follow me on Instagram at growthguide.love. Be sure to tune in next week for our newest episode.